One question I'm often asked by composition students is how to plan a large form. In the case of a vocal work, the first step will be to choose an appropriate text. Here, normally the form of the work will be largely dictated by the text. For instrumental music, often students are told to make a drawing or to follow some mathematical proportions. But this is not the way the great composers proceed. In fact, it's almost the opposite of an effective plan for reasons that will soon be apparent. Another misconception, coming mostly from Schoenberg, is that a large work must be entirely based on one core motivic idea. While such works do exist, there are many more where trying to find one core idea is fruitless, since there is none. What both of these misconceptions lack is an organic connection between the musical ideas and the form they're embodied in. In the first case, it's as though the frame exists independently of the musical ideas. In the second, it's as though just deriving a lot of material from one motive will somehow make the piece a success. If you look at how master composers proceed, the process is very different and much less Cartesian. Most of what we know about great music, we know from anecdotes and surviving sketches, for example, Beethoven's. This leads us to a more realistic approach based on sketching. If the given work is a commission, there'll be built-in constraints as to instrumentation and possibly about character as well. Obviously, it's worth thinking about these. For example, if someone asks me for a trio for piano, cello, and violin, I'll need musical material that suits those instruments, and I should think deeply about their possible interactions. A basic understanding of chamber music would dictate that all three instruments be treated more or less equally, and that the interest should frequently move between them. If it were my first time writing for this ensemble, I would look at existing examples for this combination, noting how the instruments interact and the many possible textures they can create. The goal here is not to copy a specific model, but to learn things that can be transferred into my own style. The length of the piece is another important constraint. The longer the piece, the more contrast will be required to maintain interest. A symphonic movement lasting 20 minutes needs much more varied material than a piano prelude lasting 1 minute. The first step towards actual composition is to make several varied sketches of ideas for the instrument or the ensemble in question. These sketches may be very short, perhaps just a motive, a phrase, or a rhythm, maybe a melodic line. The essential point is that it should be written down as quickly as possible without too much critical judgment. It's better to have a large pile of potential material and subsequently throw some of it out than to inhibit one's ideas too early on. This process of finding ideas needs to connect to your musical unconscious. It's not a rational, deductive process. You need to find ideas that you like, that seduce you. At this stage, you shouldn't be worrying about where in the form they will appear. The goal is simply to increase the size of that pile of paper. Once you have your pile of ideas, then you choose the ones you like best. The others can be rejected or simply filed away for future use in another piece. At this stage, you need to keep in mind the length of the piece. A longer piece will require more ideas and more variety, so you're looking for at least a few ideas that contrast well with the others. The composer then needs to know how to work on these initial ideas. Sometimes the first version is fine, but often it's not. How can it be improved? The goal is always to make the musical character as potent as possible. Ideas should be revised with this in mind. It's always worth trying out various tempi, articulations, registers, and timbres, perhaps repeating some elements for emphasis. Many versions will not be improvements, but occasionally one variant will be much better than the original. And this kind of experimenting takes almost no time. Next, you extend the best ideas into longer sketches, say a page or two. This technique is discussed in the chapter I call Presenting in my composition textbook, Musical Composition, Craft and Art. So now you have a few pages of music. Normally each page turns around one idea. Then you start looking at possible successions of ideas. Stravinsky is known to have done this simply by juggling pieces of paper on his desk to see which combinations made the most convincing juxtapositions. Sometimes you're looking for strong contrasts, or sometimes you may feel you need a transition between two ideas. Sometimes an idea in itself may include a transition toward another musical character. You may need to change an idea to make a better contrast with another. Again, experiment with things like articulation, tempo, register, etc. These are very salient features of any idea, and they have enormous influence on the musical character. The point here is that you are working to develop the form that best fits your ideas. This can take quite a bit of trial and error, but the form must follow from the ideas, otherwise it will be essentially arbitrary and certainly not emotionally convincing. These are all considerations of musical craft. To compose freely assumes you have enough craftsmanship, say, to construct an effective transition between two musical ideas. This is something a good composition teacher should be able to explain in detail. No matter what style you're writing in, you need to know how to connect musical ideas, since this is one of several fundamental skills that a composer needs all the time. Next, you'll start to think about how your piece will begin. A sudden explosion? A gradual build-up from silence? Similarly, you want to begin imagining possible endings. Most pieces have some kind of climax, generally at or near the end. Which idea or combination of ideas will make the most powerful culmination? Again, I discuss these aspects of the composer's craft in my book, Musical Composition, Craft and Art. These kinds of decisions require what we can call a sense of form. Most musical forms have a kind of general curve of gradual intensification, although not necessarily in a straight line, since the form also needs to breathe. An experienced composer will have done enough work in the academic practice forms to have developed at least the essentials of this feeling for what should happen and when. In fact, this is the main reason for a composer to study classical forms, since, properly understood, all these forms embody the same basic principles of intensification, contrast, transition, and of how to begin and end. Again, you should always be thinking about the musical character you're aiming to express. How can you underline it, making it as strong as possible? Once you have a rough overall sketch of the movement from start to finish, you'll need to listen to it several times, asking yourself what can be improved. Try to understand why things work or not. The more you understand, the more you're deepening your craft for the future. This process of sketching, common to the great composers, is the best way to gradually find the right form for your ideas. If two composers who are both masters of the craft and have found their own style started with the same ideas, sketching would produce different results for each one. In other words, there can be more than one perfect form for a given group of ideas. But there are also many forms which do not work. The ultimate decision is not mathematical or even simply logical, but it's rather a matter of constantly aiming for the result that is the most strongly expressive. If the result is unconvincing, either the ideas are weak, or the form is not right, or both.